Today we're doing a at-home alignment in the garage on the Miata, but just for a size comparison. This is how tall I am compared to the first-gen Miata. Almost impossible to fit inside, but just barely. So I was just about to start the DIY alignment video when this just goes to show that visual inspection of your car from time to time is highly important, because I just happened to see the nail. I pulled it out just so you guys could get a better look at it on video, but it was in there right between the in the tread pattern. So yeah, now I gotta plug this tire before I can get started, and pull the nail the rest of the way out. And I'll show you guys my travel plug a tire kit. I have my Ryobi air inflator with the battery. Hopefully it's got some juice. It's got 2 out of 4. I can charge it up later. Should be enough to get me through. I also have my air compressor, but I just want to show you guys you can have a travel kit and carry it in a bag. And I have the whole plug a tire kit, and I use this spray 9. When I run out of spray 9, I just fill it up with a soapy water mix. That way I can detect any leaks. It wasn't leaking with the nail all the way in, but when I pulled it out slightly, it started leaking. You can still see it. Air bubbles coming out. So we'll get that plugged, and then we'll move on to the rest of the video, the topic at hand. After much physical exertion, the new plug is in. I will now inflate the low tire up to 26 psi per the tag on the door jamb. And this was the perpetrator, this small nail. So I will save it as a memento, along with a nail that got stuck in a previous car, the previous tire. The kit came through once again. Good job, kit. And note to self, the tread depth on these tires there's more tread depth here compared to the fronts. Not by a whole lot, but noticeable enough. So next oil change is 148 miles, but I could be preemptive about it, get ahead of it, and just rotate the tires now. So put the rears on the fronts on the rears. Because I would imagine the Miata has a nearly 50-50 weight distribution, if I remember, but there is the fronts are the steering tires with all the suspension componentry, especially when I'm driving it hard. I'm loading it up in the front when I'm taking the turns at speed. So I'm just guessing the fronts are wearing out. It makes sense to me that the fronts are wearing out more than the rears. And then also, future note to self, let's see if I can get this here on video, but the brake pads in the rear are getting fairly low. They're not crazy low, but they're getting there. So note to self, replace rear brake pads and then check rotors as well in the near future. It's February, or not quite February, it's January. It's cold, so that's why I got the garage door down, but trying to get all this maintenance done on the car before driving season kicks back up into high gear in April, May. So note to self. So continuing with the DIY alignment a couple days later, I rotated the tires after I plugged the nail with the tire plug in that one tire, and now it's on the front since it was on the back. And what I have done since then is I jacked the front of the car up on both sides, and I set up my 12-ton jack stands, one in the back, one in the front, and I cut a piece of string and I tied it off onto either jack stand. And so the goal here is to get the distance. You want the string, well, first of all, you want the string to kind of run across the rim about halfway up the rim. So you're getting a nice center point there on the rim. And what we're gonna do is we'll take I have my machinist scale, and I'll pick this spot at about 3 o'clock on the face of the rim, and specifically on the lip of it, and I'll put the edge of the scale there, and then I'll see how far the string is sticking out from that edge, from that lip of the rim. And we're looking at about 1 1/8 inches. And now when I check the 9 o'clock position on the rim, I want it to also match the same distance. So got the flash in the way, but that's a little bit more than 1 1/8 inches. Sorry, I get the flash right in the way, of course. So since this gap is bigger on the 9 o'clock position compared to the 3 o'clock position, I can either shift this jack stand a little bit outward to bring this distance out more and this distance out by not as much to try to even it up, or I could take the front jack stand, I could shift it in to bring this distance in by more distance than this one, because if I shift that one in, the string will come closer, since this 9 o'clock position is closer to the front jack stand than the 3 o'clock position is to the front jack stand. And then once I get both distances from the lip, the 3 and 9 o'clock positions on the lip to the string the same, then I can set the other side on the passenger side, and then we can start loosening the tie rod ends, and then doing our adjustments to get the distance you want. You actually don't, from my research, a little late here getting the words jumbled up, but after some lengthy research, I found that you actually don't want the same distance for the front rim on the 3 and 9 position. You actually want it to be towed in about a 1/16 of an inch more on the front. So meaning, if we had, let's just assume the back was all matched up, if we had an 1.1 inch gap here, then we actually would only want an 1.16 inch gap on the front, so we would want it slightly towed in on both sides so that the car would track nice and straight when you're driving down the road, when you have the steering wheel pointed straight as you're driving. So with that said, let's go ahead and get this side evened up in the back. Then we'll do the same thing to the passenger side, and then we can loosen the tie rod ends and get this alignment zeroed in. And both sides are set up with the string. I have even gaps on the 3 and 9 positions of each back rim to each string. So for a trial 1 measurement, at the 3 o'clock position on the driver rim, we're looking at just a hair over 3/4 of an inch. And then on the 9 o'clock position, of the driver rim, I am looking at just a hair over 7/8 of an inch. Call it a 32nd over. So a 32nd over 3/4 on the 3 o'clock position, 32nd over 7/8 of an inch on the 9 o'clock position. That's actually pretty close. Now, on the passenger side, the gap is more pronounced. So on the towards the rear side of the passenger front tire, we're looking at, and I don't know how well I can show this at the camera. Maybe I'll come around this side. We're looking at just over 9/16 of an inch. And then on the front side, I guess I can keep the scale that way. We're looking at an 1.8 inch gap. So that is quite off by a bigger margin. So if we have 1.8 gap in the front, 9/16 or a hair over in the back, it is inward, and that's what we want. However, that's too much. So we're actually going to have to kick the front tire, adjust it with the tie rod so that the front passenger tire comes out a little bit, but not too much, but just out a little bit. And that could correct our, because basically, let's look at it from this angle. So we're driving this way. The front passenger tire is kicked a little too far to the left. So hence, I think, with the driver tire having the bigger gap in the front, being slightly kicked to the left, but not by much, it's mainly this side that's causing our issue, with it being kicked too far to the left. I mean, this is exaggerated, but this is slightly how this passenger tire is facing when we're trying to go straight down the road. The steering wheel pointed straight. Hence why I think it keeps pulling to the left. So if we adjust the tie rods to get this one back into spec, that one back into spec, we should be good to go. The other thing I'll mention is when you set the string up, make sure nothing off the body is going to stick out too far to hit the string. You may have to kick out your jack stands a little further out in the front and the back, but you don't want any sort of like little mud flaps in the front or the back to hit your string, because if you do that, it's going to throw off your measurements and your adjustments will be wrong. And then the other thing I'll say is I have to look at all the service records, because luckily I bought this from a great owner and there's a lot of maintenance records. So I'm going to go back through, but it could be time eventually to change out the inner and outer tie rod ends for new, for replacements, for new ones. And then, because I did that on the Mustang recently, and maybe even the ball joints, or just the whole, both lower and upper control arms, because you also have rubber bushings back here on the lower control arms to replace as well. So something to look into, but because this car has extensive documented maintenance history, that is a huge plus for me, and I can go back and reference those. But we'll see how it goes. I'll probably just do the adjustment on these for now, see how it drives after that, and then eventually, when the car needs all 4 new tires, maybe at that point I can go ahead and replace the tie rod ends and maybe even the control arms. And that way everything will be fresh and running straight and true. Okay, so for adjustment, I put my adjustable wrench, which actually has a nice locking mechanism like a vice grip would, and I put that on the outer tie rod end. I then took my 17mm wrench, and as I held upward pressure on this, I broke the 17mm jam nut loose off the face of the outer tie rod end. Once I did that, I took my 12mm wrench and I put it around the hex part of the inner tie rod end, and I cranked it lefty-loosey, which pulls the thread of the outer tie rod out of the, it pulls the thread of the inner tie rod out of the outer tie rod, forcing the outer tie rod that way, pushing the wheel that way, because the gap was too big on the front side of the wheel, which is what we want. We want to push the wheel out that way to get our alignment back closer to spec. Now, obviously, if on an alignment rack at any shop, they're going to have the whole car, all 4 wheels, on the lift, on those pads that each wheel will sit on, so everything's loaded up on the suspensions. They're going to be able to get it basically perfect on an alignment rack. So as you can see, both front wheels are up in the air, so I'll have to check this side. I already made a slight adjustment and it made it better on this side, because we had in the front, we originally had an 1 1/8 inch and 1/8 gap, and then on the back side of this rim we had a 9/16 inch gap. When I did a quarter turn lefty-loosey of the inner tie rod, I checked it, and I went from 1 1/8 in the front to 1 1/16 in the front, and in the back I went to a 9/16 inch gap, trying to get a bigger gap to a 5/8 inch gap. So I went from being too far cocked in to slightly back towards straight 1/16 of an inch. I checked this side and there was no change, even though it's up in the air, and of course both tie rod ends connect to the steering rack, which you can't see. and then out to the other tie rod ends. So you just got to make sure that it doesn't change it, or if it does change it, hopefully only slightly, and then we can play with it trying to get this side to where we want it. So after about 4 more quarter turns in the same direction of that outer tie rod end on the passenger side, I'm looking at about a 32nd over 3/4 of an inch on the back side of this passenger tire. It's almost to 13/60 of an inch, but not quite. And then if we look at the front side, it's just under 7/8 of an inch. So on the back side, over 3/4 of an inch. On the front side, under 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to leave that alone because that is very, very close to a 1/16 of an inch. Because the other thing I'm going to tell you is when I go to tighten this jam nut up against the face of the outer tie rod, it could shift it slightly, and it may be more in our favor. So I'm going to leave that alone, tighten this jam nut, and I'll show you that after adjusting that passenger side outer tie rod 4 or 5 quarter turns, I believe it was 5 total, I didn't get any change on this side. And we're looking at still the same, just over 7/8 of an inch on the front side of this driver's side tire. And it should be about 3/4 of an inch. Yep, just slightly over 3/4 of an inch on the back side of this front driver tire. So now that the passenger side is good, I'm going to tighten that 17mm jam nut, holding the adjustable wrench on the outer tie rod, of course, and then I'll tweak the driver's side, which wasn't that bad, and then take it for a road test, see if it tracks much straighter when I hold the wheel straight as I drive. So as expected, this side did not need much adjustment. Again, I broke the 17mm jam nut loose while holding the outer tie rod end, because it has 2 flats on either side of the outer tie rod end that can hold the adjustable. And then I simply had to take the 12mm wrench and go lefty-loosey, so go this way, just a quarter turn to get it in within spec. So I really, my explanation earlier for the driver's side may have been backwards when I explained it, but just to give you another visual, we want the front end of the tire to be slightly kicked in, about a 1/16 more kicked in than the back. And that is what I have achieved here, because as you can see, let me flip the phone around here. I think I can get a better angle on it from the side. So the front side of the tire, before, when we started, it was a little over 7/8 of an inch, and now it is right on 7/8 inch gap. So we have the bigger gap, hopefully on the front. And then on the back side, it is right under, just a hair under 13/16 of an inch. So we have that one bike right in the way, but we have that 1/16 inch bigger gap in the front, which means the front of the tire on the driver's side is just a slightly kicked in, slightly more than the rear side. So I'll tighten this jam nut, and hopefully there will be no change in the gap. And then just because I did that adjustment on the driver's side, I'll go ahead and do one final check on the passenger side, make sure nothing got moved. So once again, we have about, on the back side, we have about 13/16 of an inch gap. And on the front, we have our basically right on 7/8 of an inch gap. And so that has worked out, and basically that concludes our DIY alignment. Of course, if you have a high performance car or you just want a super critical accurate alignment, you will have to take your personal vehicle or whatever, what have you, to a shop and get it on their alignment rack, because they have a sensor that goes onto each individual. It affixes itself to each individual rim, and then I believe with lasers they're able to get the alignment like right dead nuts on the money for you, and then they give you a printout proving that, showing you before and after. And obviously that is the absolute best, but for me here in the garage, I did on the Mustang, and it tracks nice and true. I don't have to hold the steering wheel slightly to the right or to the left or whatever it was just to go straight. And I'm hoping that with the adjustments I made here, it'll be the same way with the Miata, because with the Miata I was holding the steering wheel slightly to the left just to keep going straight, because if I point the wheel straight, then the whole car would pull to the left. So hopefully we have that fixed. And like I said, the inner and outer tire ends will be replaced at some point. I'm going to go back. I'll probably make another video just laying out all of the service maintenance records that have been done on this vehicle before I owned it, because I just think that's so cool that you have an actual history of what's been done to the car to keep it so well maintained, and it really shows. And I feel it too every time I drive it. This car is very solid for a 1990 Mazda Miata. It does have some oil and transmission leaks, but basically every Miata on the first generation has that by now. All those seals and gaskets, they dry up over time, and they, it's time for them to be replaced. So that will all that in the future, but for right now, alignment done so far. See ya.